Sí, buenas tardes a todos. Bienvenidos a esta, sesión final de este segundo día del curso Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, Avances y Retos de la Agenda 2030. Tenemos en esta ocasión, para cerrar este tercer bloque que hemos titulado Los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, el Objetivo 17 y el establecimiento de alianzas para lograr los objetivos, a Tonye Cole, fundador del Sahara Group y miembro del World Economic Forum, Partnering Against Corruption Initiative. Tonye Cole es fundador y director del ejecutivo del Sahara Group, que junto con sus socios hizo crecer, fundándolo en 1996 en una sola entidad, en una de las principales energías africanas y conglomerado de infraestructuras con operaciones en más de 10 países en 4 continentes. Es miembro activo de la World Economic Forum Partnering Against Corruption Initiative y también representa al Sahara Group como miembro del Grupo Asesor del Sector Privado del Fondo de Desarrollo Sostenible de las Naciones Unidas. En reconocimiento a su papel por promover el crecimiento económico inclusivo para la erradicación de la pobreza, la creación de capacidades, la seguridad alimentaria y el acceso al agua potable en África. Su pasión por el desarrollo juvenil y la retribución a los menos privilegiados se manifiesta a través de su fundación Nehemiah Youth Foundation, espero haberlo pronunciado correctamente, en el área de la educación, el medio ambiente, la salud, el desarrollo de capacidades y actualmente en el área de Partnership, utilizando un modelo que busca impulsar la sostenibilidad y crear plataformas que encuentren, creen y conecten a los jóvenes con intereses comerciales en mercados emergentes. He de decir además que ha hecho un gran esfuerzo por acompañarnos. Paloma Durán le conoce ya hace tiempo, conoce su trabajo, ha sido una de las personas que ha propuesto que esté aquí con nosotros. Él ha hecho un esfuerzo para venir desde Nigeria. He de decir además que es una persona con una paciencia terrible porque lleva acompañándonos desde esta mañana, intentando hacer un esfuerzo grande por seguir los temas que se han tratado en este curso. Y bueno, va a hacer su ponencia en inglés. Hemos distribuido una serie de auriculares que esperamos todos tengáis. Si alguno no tiene, que levante la mano y se lo acercamos. Y sin más dilación, también aprovechando y dando la bienvenida a nuestro compañero Jesús Baigorri, que también ha trabajado en Naciones Unidas y conoce todos estos temas bastante bien y que nos acompañe, se ha ofrecido para hacer la interpretación, a quien también se lo agradecemos. Como decía, sin más dilación, Tonye, muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos. The floor is totally yours.
Muito obrigado, Miguel. Eu falo português, mas não hablo espanhol, então. So I'm going to speak in English. It's safer for me to make this presentation in English, and I hope you would follow me as closely as possible. So thank you to Paloma, to Miguel, to the university, to the foundation for inviting me. I've come a long way, but I would have done this anytime, any day. It's a big pleasure and an honor to come and speak with all of you. I also brought my beautiful better half, Sylvia. She's my doctor. I've been with her for 31 years now. We've been married for 24 of those 31 years. We have 3 children, all by her, and she's the reason why I look the way I am. So please, a big round of applause for her. Now, the foundation has asked me to do 2 things. First is to speak about a very, very difficult topic. And second is to keep you awake at 5 o'clock after a very long day. So I hope I can do both. So let's start with the harder of the 2. We'll start with corruption. Corruption is global. It's a global phenomenon. And I come from a country where, in 2005, everywhere I went, this is what we heard, that Nigeria was the most corrupt. It was listed amongst the 10 most corrupt countries in the world. I also happen to be in a business which is in the extractive industry. So I came from an extractive industry in Nigeria, and we had this poster child called corruption, which meant everywhere I went, it was immediately and automatically assumed that I was corrupt, my country was corrupt, and the business I did was corrupt. So enter the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum, as most of you know, is a group that allows some of the largest companies in the world to participate and determine what would happen in the world. When I got into the World Economic Forum as a company, I looked around and I found that the first thing was that we did not have many African companies that qualified to participate at the World Economic Forum. And then I got introduced to a group called Partnering Against Corruption Initiative, PACI, which is an offshoot of the World Economic Forum, was founded many years ago by most of the leading companies that you have in the world, and have dedicated themselves to putting good governance, good practices from a private sector perspective to fighting corruption the world over. I sat in a presentation just like this on the first day. If 10 people came to make presentations, 9 of them used Nigeria as an example of corruption in their presentation. I looked around the room, to the left, to the right, front and behind, and I saw no Nigerians in the room. I saw nobody who could defend what it meant, like living, working, operating within that same example that was being used. And I found that it was an unfair characterization of people that are well over 180 of them. And so I decided that we needed to do something about that. So in 2013, when I joined PACI, I found out, as most of you would know, that corruption was not a Nigerian subject only, but that it was a global phenomenon. And it was a problem all over the world, and that most people you would ask find that corruption is a major issue that stems, withholds, and hampers their development. And so the problems that we had in Nigeria were problems that I found across board common. And most people were looking for solutions. But where my challenge was that every time that there was going to be a presentation, only one country will be used as the example in that presentation. And I felt we needed to work on that. As at last year, through very active participation in PACI and with the government of Nigeria as well, we have managed to remove Nigeria from being the poster child of corruption. And so today, if you have any presentation, if 10 people are going to present, you're not going to hear 9 of them using Nigeria as an example. And what did we do? We focused on making sure that people began to look for the positive aspects of actually working towards designing corruption out of a system. And that as long as you were able to design corruption using technology, using what people, the general drive and desires that human beings want to make sure that things are easy and removing the hurdles, that you can move up the index of Transparency International. And we also found that the greatest thing about corruption was that it was more affected by the perception of corruption than the actual corruption itself. And that when you held on to the perception and you used the perception as the defining character for corruption, you found that most countries cannot come out of corruption. And so it became important that we began to speak a different type of language, especially in Nigeria. And that's what we began to push. Who is telling your story? How are they telling the story? How do they celebrate the steps that you take out of it? And what can you change? And so to do this, I need to give you a little introduction about the story of Nigeria. Is Nigeria only about corruption? Or do we have other things that you might be interested in? So I'll play a quick video here. Can you play this video?
Lagos, Nigeria. The race course, where many would say the journey of modern-day Nigeria as we know it began. My name is Olashpo Shashore. Along with a gifted team of researchers, I'm going to take you through the timelines of how this great country came to be. Together, we will go back to some big moments in time.
The fury from the air went on and on. Our airmen in technical support of the ground forces took no rest that day.
The British Empire lasted 300 years. At the height of it, they ruled over literally a third of the world's population. So if the Crown conceived the idea of a colony, it was executed by the members of Parliament. The halls where the Magna Carta, the freedom of justice, the Bill of Rights were conceived and delivered to the world was the very same halls where slavery and colonization was being carried out. December 27th, 1851, the palace of the king was finally destroyed. The first possession in this part of the country then became the Lagos colony. We're fortunate because we have one of the most contemporary diarists of the time, Giambattista Scala. The wretched appearance of this town, destroyed by cannon and fire, made the saddest impression on me. We shall unearth some hidden or suppressed truths. What was the reason behind the war? Why war?
The war was for protection against enemies.
We should learn about the lives of the real people who made history. The Women's War, Ogun Umuwanyi, a war waged by women. The result was devastating. 31 women were killed within one afternoon. Market women were selling in night markets like this at prices that they determined to who they determined to sell to. It was a protest not against only just the price, but government authority. It galvanized people together as they led into 1945. We will go to places that have either been forgotten or avoided. Then together we should debunk some myths that tell a truly different story of the history of this African giant.
In the 1930s, in fact, Ikoyi was known as the most select residential area in the world.
We will transform not just how you understand this nation to be, but also your understanding of the African continent and the world. Come, let us go on the journey of this African colony.
Okay. So that's by a friend of mine who's preparing a documentary that will tell the history of Nigeria from a Nigerian perspective for the world to see. But a bit about me. At the introduction, you were given a story that is a resume, but I don't know whether that's really who I am. So this is who I am. So I come from a little town, very much like this, maybe not with as much grand history as this, but a history I'm proud of as well. It's a town called Abonima, and it's in the Niger Delta. But when we talk about the Niger Delta, this is what the world knows the Niger Delta to be. A land of hostile militants with guns and boats, kidnapping, blowing up pipelines, and all sorts of atrocities. That's the story of the Niger Delta that the world knows. But this is the Niger Delta that I know. Very different. Yes, we still use boats. You still have human beings in the boats. They're still carrying things in their hands, but those are not guns, neither are they spears. They're just paddles. It's a land rich in history. It's got its own culture, its tradition, and water is very central to the people of the Niger Delta. It's a delta. Everywhere you go, you find water. And so it's no surprise that when I chose a place to live in Lagos, I chose to live by the water. So my house is somewhere behind all the trees down there. If you look hard enough, maybe you might just see it. But yes, it's by the water. And yes, this is where I live in Lagos. And what's Lagos? Lagos is in Nigeria. And Nigeria, to give you a perspective, that's the size of Nigeria. You can fit in Nigeria 2 times Spain. You can fit all of Germany in it, Austria and Poland together. It's not a small country by size, neither is it a small country by population. Africa was colonized. The British colonized, the French colonized, Spanish a bit, Portuguese a bit, German some. But when you take all of the colonies, the former colonies of the French-speaking countries, you put them all together, the population of all of that is what you have as a population of Nigeria. The little red dot there is Nigeria. All the blue colonies there all fit into the population. So we're not a small nation by population. The United Nations estimates that by 2050, the population of Nigeria is going to more than double. It's going to go beyond 400 million. Now that's frightening. It means we're going to be the 3rd largest country by population size in the world. A lot has to be done. If we sit down and we do nothing about it, then there's going to be some very serious impacts to the world. 400 million people who are restless, that spells trouble. And this is what we see today. That's just the migration map. The bright yellow spots that you see is the trend of migration. And if you follow that trend, you see that most of it is heading to Spain. Most of it is heading into Europe. That has to stop. And the only way that we can stop this migration is that we have to do something at the source of the migration, not at the end of the migration. It only works at the source. And it's at the source of this migration that the SDGs come to play. Some believe that the SDGs in itself is utopian. It's an ideal, it's a dream that can never be achieved. Maybe. But if we fold our hands and do absolutely nothing, I think it's worse off for us. And so what do we have? We have 17 goals, of which when I think about Africa, every single 17 goals matter. And when I showed you the size of Nigeria, compared to the size of the rest of Africa, in population, and from the country that I know, every single of those 17 goals must be met. And now it then follows that if Nigeria fails to meet the 17 goals, then Africa, by default, will fail. And if Africa fails to meet the 17 goals, then the world, by default, will fail. And so it's important that goal number 17, which talks about partnerships, is something that we must pay attention to. Every goal is important, but the one goal that I fully believe matters the most is the goal of partnership. It means every single stereotype has to be dropped. It means people must come together, work together to achieve these goals. We can't do it on our own. The private sector can definitely not do it on their own. The multilateral agencies tried doing it on their own with the MDGs, and they failed. Civil society have tried for a long time, and they failed as well. The only way that we can do this is that we must work together. And so, let's keep Africa in perspective. If the SDGs are going to work, we must understand Africa. We must understand what Africa really means. And the first place to start is that Africa is not one country. We've heard this before, but believe me, it will shock you to believe that people think Africa is one country. And so I travel the world and they say, where are you from? I say, I'm from Nigeria. Okay. Where's Nigeria? You're from Africa. Ah, okay, Africa. Now they know Africa. But Africa is not one country. This is the size of Africa. As you can see, you can fit into that continent of Africa all of the USA, all of China, all of India, most of Europe, if not all of it, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Japan. It's not a small continent. It's a huge continent. And we must always have this in perspective when we're dealing with the problems and the solutions for Africa. Because if we don't have this in perspective, we will be quick to judge, quick to condemn, and quick to dismiss. It's a huge task for anyone who lives within Africa to find the solutions for Africa. And so what should you think about when you think of Africa? The first is that most people, when it comes to anthropology, will tell you that Africa is where we all come from. So maybe we all have a vested interest in Africa. So the first man started in Africa and then we all moved up. Maybe. So Africa is very old in terms of geology, it's old in terms of structure, it's old in terms of the human anthropology. But in reality, Africa is young in the things that matter today. Africa is very young. Africa is young in democracy. Most African countries are less than 30 years old when it comes to democracy. It's a new concept. It's a concept that is building. It's a concept that is taking root. It's a concept that they're learning to adapt with, but it's still young. For Spain, for the UK, for the Americas, well over 200 years, 100 years. So you are old in it. So please don't judge us on the same criteria. We're still learning, but we're learning fast. And so you have term limits in place now for most elected offices in Africa. Some have tried to extend those term limits and have failed. Some have been voted out of power by the people. So the population of Africa is coming to understand what it means to have the power of their voter's card and the voice that comes from being a people that vote. Come next year, in March, Nigeria goes to the elections again. It's something that we have become used to since 1999, a democracy that continues to evolve and change. We're a young demography. Over 65% of the African population is under 30. They're restless. They're a lot like you. They need to be kept very busy. Their minds need to be kept engaged. They need to find things to do. And if they don't, they move or they get violent. And so we find things for them. We inspire them through our writing, through our literature, through the words. Africans are great storytellers. We tell stories. Today we're trying to write stories. We've told stories for a long time, so we haven't kept our history very well. So now we write. We're musicians. We win awards. Some you know, like Fela, the older ones, Anikulapo Kuti. Others are younger, Wizkid. He's from my children's generation. I hardly know his music, but my wife does. She's younger than I am. Or we have award-winning actors from Hollywood. Lupita from Uganda. And what are they doing? They're reshaping the narrative of Africa. They're telling Africa from a different perspective. As the Black Panther movie. How many of you watched the Black Panther? How many? Okay. I recommend you should all watch it. I think it tells a different story. So what does good governance mean? What does telling this story mean? What does it mean to have Africans tell African stories? What does it mean to have politicians begin to do what needs to be done? What does it mean to have businesses who are like mine, who are established in Nigeria but are global, who have offices in Geneva, in Dubai, in Switzerland, who work face to face and have to make governance a part and parcel of our lives. What does it mean? How does it translate? And this is how it translates. In 1999, prior to democracy coming into Nigeria, I was in university in Nigeria, in the University of Lagos. And these were the scenes that we saw when we went out. That was a bus stop where you take public transportation. And so every yellow vehicle you see there is a public transportation vehicle. And all the human beings you see around there are either trying to get in or going somewhere. That's what we used to have. So to get into a public transportation mode, you really had to fight to get to where you were going. That wasn't too long ago, 30, 35 years. Same bus terminal today. Does democracy have dividends? I think so. Does education have dividends? I believe so. So, that could be in Spain. Maybe we'll change it to Madrid bus terminal and it will work. But that's in Nigeria. That's a bridge in Nigeria and Lagos as well. That's Lagos today. That's what you see. Infrastructure. Holding governments accountable. Making sure that the ease of doing business is better. We're rising in our rankings of doing business. We're appreciating more what it means to have an international business face. So electricity. I believe the first session today talked about electricity, and it talked about women in electricity, if I remember right, at 9 o'clock. All right. So that's the map I saw a couple of years ago. It's a map of electricity, a satellite map at night. And when I saw this map for the first time, it broke my heart. Now, the little light you see here, that's Nigeria. So Nigeria is right there at the corner, and everywhere else is dark. Yes, a huge part of Africa is desert, so you have the Sahara Desert, so you won't have much light in the Sahara Desert. And yes, you have the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa, but it's still not good enough. And it's no excuse. So what did we do? So as a company, we decided that we were going to get involved in electricity and that we were going to play a part in making sure that we could light up Africa, light up Nigeria, and light up Lagos. And so we started off by acquiring power plants in Nigeria and driving it up to 2,000 megawatts today, with a firm focus that we're going to go to 5,000 megawatts in the next 5 years. It's still a far cry from what we need. It's estimated that Nigeria needs about 50,000 megawatts of power today. But if we can do 10% of that, I think we've come a long way, and we've done a bit, but not all. We're also the largest distributor of power in Nigeria, in Lagos, the commercial capital. For some reason, we chose Spanish colors, so Viva España. But that's our headquarters of our power generation company in Lagos. I like the colors. Huh? We'll play the World Cup there next time. But electricity is important. If I go back 2 slides, the top of that says that there's absolutely no development without electricity. There's none. And the way the world is going today, technology, every single thing is hinged on electricity. The reason why we're doing what we're doing today, why I can project, why I can speak, is because there's electricity here. Without that, there's no development. There's no way we can leapfrog, there's no way we can catch up, and there's no way we can make a difference if electricity as a basis is not taken seriously. And so we've been pushing policy. We've been fighting governments. We've been working hard. It's tough. One of the hardest things is to change policies that have been set 50 years ago. and policies that don't work today. But advocacy is what we do. And that's where the private sector advisory group comes in. And so I segue back to the SDGs, and I segue back to how we can make a difference. So the United Nations sat together a couple of years ago and decided that they were going to move from the MDGs to the SDGs. And it was decided then that the way that they would have to do this is they had to bring the private sector involved. And why? The way I explain this is that every policy that is dreamt up by governments, by anyone, any policy in this world, the main actors and the implementers of those policies is the private sector. We're in the forefront of it, so we see it. We see where the hurdles are, we know where the corruption is, we know where the difficulties are, we know where the bottlenecks are, we know what it means to design those bottlenecks out of the system. We see it every single day. And so if you're going to design a policy, any policy, the group of people that will test that policy in any way will be your entrepreneurs, will be your small and medium-scale enterprises, will be your business sector. They are the ones who will test it. They're the ones who will come back to you and tell you that this works or it doesn't work. And they expect that you would listen. Where the challenges come is when we don't listen, and when we think one person is trying to take advantage of the other, and then there's no collaboration. But when we listen, this is what happens. And so what happened? The United Nations called and said, can we set up a private sector advisory group to help us understand the language of business and help business understand the language of the multilateral agencies? There was an admittance from the beginning that both parties had been at war for years, literally at war. Business did not trust multilateral agencies, they didn't trust governments, and governments definitely did not trust business. And so we were at war. But if we were going to achieve the SDGs, we needed to find peace. We needed to find a round table where we could sit together, put all the issues out, and figure out how we could work together. And that's where the private sector advisory group came. So Paloma and her group of people sat down and they went through a very tough diligence. Over 100 companies, 100? Over 100 companies were screened, diligenced, questioned, and they selected 13. Of those 13, there were 2 that came from Africa, the rest, some from Spain, the rest from other parts of the world. And Sahara was one, and Sab Miller, the brewery from South Africa, now they've been bought over by, I think, AB. Anyway. And so we began to draft and figure out how we could work together. For a year, we sat down and we came up with a language that began to help us understand how best the SDGs can work. And what did business find out? Business found out almost immediately, looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, that it was actually good for business, that it made sense for business, that it worked for business, and business adopted it very, very quickly. But before I get to that, from a business perspective, one of the things that we did after we had designed the language and we had designed the model as to how the private sector and the United Nations could work together, was we needed to test the concept. We knew that when it came to business, we work quickly, we take decisions fast, but multilateral agencies might take their time in taking decisions, and so we had to test a model. And so we put together a project called Food Africa. And Food Africa started off by partnering with, who knows that man there? He happens to be Spain's greatest food celebrity. I learned that it takes about a year and a half to get into his restaurant, El Can de Celajoca. But courtesy to Paloma and her contacts, I was able to eat there, so thank you. I didn't have to wait a year. But we partnered with him. And we set up something called Food Africa, which basically looked at post-harvest waste. Within Africa, 60% of vegetable rots at the farm door. 60% goes to waste. It never gets to the table. And so we began to look at what modalities we can do to preserve vegetables, tomatoes, peppers, and things like that. And so, working with Joseph, Roca, Paloma, and some farmers, over 100 farmers that we had been training, my wife and I had been training them for how many years? 4 years, thereabouts. So we had been training them on techniques, sending them to school. We began to work together to put Food Africa together. It brought ITF from the United Nations in. It brought FAO from the United Nations. It brought UNDP in. It brought ILO, I believe, International Labour Organization in. It brought the Kaduna State government into the picture. It brought the Nigerian Ministry of Agriculture into the picture. It brought Sahara into the picture, and it brought the Roca brothers into the picture. And so we had to sit down and test whether or not the SDGs was really ready to have multilateral agencies and private sectors sit together to work on a project. Were we ready? We learned a few lessons. It wasn't as quick as we thought, but it progressed. And we stayed firm on it. And today, this woman has been a great help. You know her? She's somewhere in the room. But we stayed on it. And what was the lesson that we learned? Be diligent. Don't give up. It's hard. It's difficult. Collaboration is not easy. Partnerships are not easy. But if you believe in the same vision, you will get there. Eventually, but you will get there. Now we have 2030, so we can't waste a lot of time. But we will get there. So we learned a lot of lessons. It was a model pilot case. But since then, other models have picked up. And what was this? What were these models? The first aspect of it is the private sector advisory group. Now, what happened was Paloma had set up one at the United Nations level, which I was on the board on the advisory group. And we took the same model, and we decided that can we replicate this model in Nigeria? And can we get private sector companies to come together who can see what the SDGs are and begin to implement the SDGs in their companies and within their sphere of influence? And is it possible? So we put it together, took it to the presidency. We needed the presidential stamp and backing on it. The vice president bought into it, supported it, believing that the SDG is a critical path of growth for Nigeria. And so last year, it was inaugurated. And that's the vice president there, and I think I'm the one standing next to him. I happen to be the taller of them. And so that's the private sector advisory group. And so I'm going to conclude by just telling you a bit of how we came together to bring the private sector and the SDGs together. So who are we? Essentially, we're private sector-driven organizations who have seen, who believe that we can make an impact in different spheres of what the SDGs represent. We already do it. We really have not needed the United Nations to put a name to the social work we do for us to do the work we do. It's already been done. But what the SDGs did, and why private sector has bought into it, is for the first time, we had a name and a number that we could associate with the work and the social work that we do in the different areas where we do that has given us a social license to operate. For the first time. So if I was interested in women, I knew immediately that there was an SDG 5 that worked for that. If I was interested in agriculture, I knew almost immediately that there was an SDG number 2 that worked for that. If poverty was what I was about, I did not need to ask. I would find out immediately that SDG 1 worked for me. And so on and so forth. If it was strengthening institutions, I knew immediately that there was a number that worked for me. And that's why the SDGs have worked. And so, we sat down as a group, and we came together, and we decided that if we were going to make this work, partnership was important. We all had to come together. Private sector competitors, we compete. We compete hard. But when it came to the SDGs, we knew that we had to sit together and work together with competitors, but working together. We understood that we needed to innovate in the way that we carried out CSR and move from CSR to making SDGs a part and parcel of who we are. Sustainability had to become who we were. We had to move. And we had to be transparent. We had to be accountable. And so we set up what you would call, working with PwC, we set up a tool that would measure, that would see what we were doing, that would measure the impact of what we were doing, and that would go through and can be used and accessed as a report to show the level of impact that we were making. And so, starting from 2015, all the way to 2010, those are the steps that we are taking. From being purely private, to working with the public sector, to delivering some of the SDGs. We broke up the SDGs into clusters that make sense for the private sector. Now, the United Nations has 17 different goals, but we found out when we were looking at them that some of us are interested in more than one goal. Some businesses overlap in SDGs. Some do 2 and 4, some do 1 and 5, some do 3. And so we looked at it and we broke it up into clusters, and we had 10 clusters. But we also knew that you needed people who would lead and drive those clusters. And so we set up a model where each of these 10 clusters was led by a leading enterprise within the area who was already doing what they were doing. They were already doing it, nothing changed, but now they could come together with different people in the same field and scale. And so I'll give you a typical example. If you're building a school, what you would find in the past was that we would go into a community where we work, and there might be 5 different companies working within that community, and all of them will decide that they're going to build a school. And every single one of them will build 5 schools. The schools will have no teachers, no desks, nothing else but 5 buildings. And so what we decided when we came together was that rather than building 5 different buildings, one will build a school, do the building, another will provide the furniture, a third will bring teachers, another might bring computers, and everyone would come together, and that way we can be more efficient with the things that we do within the communities. That was the sense of coming together as a cluster. And so we divided those clusters up, and people began to select who would lead those clusters. And you will see some of the names. Some are national, some are international. Channels is the leading national independent television in Nigeria. You have Unilever, you have Nestle, you have Google and Airtel, Standard Chartered, all leading clusters. You also have Coca-Cola, you have Siemens, General Electric, Lafarge, leading their clusters. I'm still looking for 2 clusters: life above water and life on land. We will find them. But I think the idea is clear. Partnerships is key. the SDGs cannot work without partnerships. The SDGs cannot work without the private sector. The SDGs cannot work without civil society. The SDGs can definitely not work without governments. All parties must come together. Private sector, civil society, the government, and generally anyone else in the mix. Without you, it's going to fail. Thank you very much. Time for questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. Alex? Thank you, Tony. So now is time for questions. Do we have the other? El otro micrófono está por aquí en algún sitio. Está allí, está allí. Empezamos con este.
Yeah, Tony, thank you so much for the explanation and for the whole picture about the work that you are doing with the PSAC. But you know, one of the things that I would like that maybe you can explain a little bit is how do you integrate the SDGs into the work that the company is doing, because you already explained that the work that we are trying to do, building up this private sector advisory group at the national level with all the companies, but I would like to know like the other side of the coin. I mean, what are the things that you are doing inside the company in order to ensure also the implementation of the SDGs for private sector? Thank you.
Okay, can I have more than one question to answer that? I got
More
you.
questions from the public? And besides, you can make the questions in Spanish. He has interpretation into English. So, yeah. You present yourself.
Yes, well, I am Elena, Tony, you know me. Thank you very much for your speech. Muchas gracias, Tony. I have just a short question, but it's complicated to answer, I know. How do you see the future of the SDG in Nigeria and from your perspective, public-private partnership? Thank you.
Gracias, Elena. ¿Alguna pregunta más por aquí, por este lado? A ver, todas esas energías que tenéis acumuladas. Bueno, vamos a empezar. Mira, aquí tenemos otra pregunta.
Hi, my name is Lucas. Do you think it's possible to export the model of Nigeria to the rest of Africa? Thank you.
Okay.
So we can start with this.
Let me start with those three. Okay. So, so to Paloma's question, the first thing that we discovered from a business perspective was that we had to. Can I stand here?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I prefer to stand.
Even there.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Right. So the first thing I discovered when we were putting together the SDGs was that we needed to make sure that people understood themselves what it was about. And we found that, just like to Elena's question as well, that you found that most people did not know what the SDGs were. It was a language that was kept at the United Nations level, and it did not translate down to what everybody on a day-to-day basis understood. So even though you were talking about it, and once you got into the United Nations environment, everybody knew about the SDG, but as soon as you stepped out, nobody knew about it. So the first challenge that we had was that internally, we had to be able to translate what the SDG meant to what we were doing on a day-to-day basis. And so through the appraisals that we do, through our sustainability report that we had to do, we had to begin to explain and educate people within the company as to what the role of the SDGs were and how it impacted them. At the CEO level, it was very easy to see. As soon as you saw it, you knew immediately that these were things that were good for your business. Very easy to see. Now you had to educate people that were working with you so that they can catch the vision, see the vision, and manage the vision. So that was the next aspect of it. We had to move our foundation, which was almost like a standalone business, and we had to make it integral to everything we were doing on the SDGs. So they began to become a very integral aspect of it. One of the things that we also did was that we seconded the person who was driving the foundation, and we seconded that person to the United Nations to go in to begin to work in the United Nations on the SDGs as part of the partnership model that we were talking about. So that began to happen. So those are some of the initiatives that we needed to do. But you need to speak the SDGs to people on a one-on-one basis, because most people think it's United Nations, it's a United Nations problem. It's not their problem. It's everybody's problem, and that's the truth. Now, going to the next questions, especially what I think, do I see and how I see the SDGs working, it's tough. It's a very, very, very challenging problem. Advocacy is one thing. I believe that when the countries signed on the SDGs, they signed it without knowing what it took and how much work it's needed to make sure that it happens. They did not understand and they didn't appreciate it. However, over the last 3 years, what I have seen happen is that there has been a realization that this needs to happen. And so within the United Nations, there has been a restructuring also of how the SDGs must be implemented. From the private sector aspect of it, more private companies are coming in to the SDGs to figure out how it's going to work. So can it work? We don't have a choice. That's the way I see it. I think it's too important for it not to work. It's too important to leave in the hands of one individual, one body, whether civil society. It's too important to leave in their hands. It's too important to leave in the hands of government, and definitely way too important to leave in the hands of the private sector. We all have to work together. But if we don't work together, Elena, is not going to work. If we work together, we have a chance to make it work. But 2030, it's not far. It's around the corner. It's not far. So, your question, the model. So a couple of so first of all, there's something called the High-Level Political Forum. It's a forum that the private sector normally is not invited in at the United Nations. So last year, about this time in July last year, we were invited in to make a presentation. So I made the presentation there, and I presented a longer version of that slide to them. At the meeting, immediately after, Egypt, Uganda, Kenya, Ghana, anyway, a couple of them saw the model and asked if I can send the model to them, that they would like to implement the model within their countries, and we send the model. For me, the model is not, the more countries that can implement it, the better. And so anybody who wants it, I give to them. I was in Chad about 3 months ago, and all. I met with the president and the first lady there, and I told them about it. They sent one of their advisors to come to Nigeria when we were having a meeting on the PSAG. They came into the meeting. They saw what we were doing, saw the model. I sent the model to them so that they can begin to implement. They've asked me to make a presentation when we go to the United Nations next month for them to come and work with them to see if they can implement it. It's the first time that this has been done at this level. It's the first country and first private sector initiative that has worked and tested the model. So it's a model, and we designed it specifically as a model to see if it can work as a model and can export it. And we're definitely willing to export to as many countries as wanted. Okay.
Sí, otra pregunta por aquí.
Sí, hola, Tony, congratulations. En primer lugar, preguntarte cuánto tiempo de tu vida diaria dedicas a este proceso nuevo de los ODS. Y en segundo lugar, y aunque un poco más, no me gustaría tener que hacerte esta pregunta, ¿qué porcentaje de recursos dedicas a este proceso? Thank you.
Muy bien, ¿alguna pregunta más? A ver, por allí. Nos presentamos.
Congratulations, Tony. My name is John. I'm from Haiti. I'm doing a master in political science here in Spain. But my question is, how the youth can help or create social impact in Nigeria? How the youth can help or create the social impact in Nigeria?
Vamos para allá.
Thank you. Tony, I'm Anna. Thank you very much for your speech. It's been really inspiring. My question has to be, it's related to the topic we were talking about this morning, gender equality, which is the 5th Sustainable Development Goal. I'm wondering how how is this 5th SDG being implemented in Nigeria through some conglomerates or enterprises like yours, like Sahara Group? Are you creating any mechanism to empower women?
Gracias, thank you very much. It's okay, these 3 questions, and then we go on. Yeah.
Okay. So let me start with the last question. It's the most topical, but it's the easiest for me to answer as well. So most definitely, it's a big problem. It's a big problem, and there's no denying it. But different countries are at different levels when it comes to gender equality and all of that. Nigeria, depending on what part of Nigeria you are at, you find that some areas of Nigeria are much more developed when it comes to gender equality than others. Okay, so you have religion, you have traditions, you have all sorts of things, but it's a problem. Now, what do we do within my company, and how do we deal with this? So the first aspect of it is when it comes to employment, we have absolutely no gender bias when it comes to employment. We found out that in employing, surprisingly for us, we found out that more women enter into our workforce on merit than men. Okay, and I don't know why. Well, I think I know why. The men are very lazy these days. But somehow we found out that a lot more women come into the workforce. And we found out also that when they're graduating from school today, right, that the women are coming out top of the class. I see this a lot because I speak to a lot of youths. Again, I don't know why. So the women come out on top of the class because probably they're working harder and they're told that they need to do better. So I don't know, but they're coming out top of the class. When we do the exams, because we do a very merit-based entry exam, they score higher. So we're employing about 55 to 60% more women at entry level than men. But then we noticed a problem. We noticed that when they got to, and then they were rising promotions, everything, no problem. And then we saw that when they got to about 31, 32, till about 38 years, they just disappeared. So I didn't notice this until I was asked to come and speak at a women's conference. And the same questions, I was asked to come and present, what are you doing and all of that. So I asked my HR to bring the data, and I wanted to see at the different levels what we're doing. And then I found out that for some reason, they were disappearing. So I called the HR and I asked them, what's going on? What's happening? Why are we losing a lot more women between the ages of 30 and 38? And I'm sure you know what the reason was. Okay, so we found out they're either relocating because their husbands were relocating, or they were getting married, or they were having children and all of that. So I decided with them that we needed to work something out, that we need to make sure that we can keep them. So what do you need to do? Is there a way that you need to change some? Maybe the policies are not working. Maybe they feel that they should not. That it can. It's all sorts of things. We have. Some are afraid of saying that they are pregnant before they are pregnant. I don't know why. There's some superstition also involved in all of this. So we decided that can we work on all of these things to ensure that, one, women are not afraid, that they can come into the workforce? If they are going on maternity, can we increase their maternity time? Can we give some of the men within the office some time as well to go home so that there is paternity and all of that? We're toying with the aspect of flexi time as well, that can we work with that? So these are things that we're looking at. But then the next level, again, is at the higher level, so CEOs, board members, and all of that. We also found out that because of the numbers who are disappearing at this critical point, that when it then comes to the senior management and the CEOs and all of that, that we could not find enough because they had disappeared. And so now we needed to make a conscious effort to find CEOs and MDs who were women and all of that. So today, 2 of our companies, we have 6 active companies in different levels, so power and all of that. 2 of them are women that lead. Our upstream business is fully run by women. Excellent. She's probably one of the better CEOs that I know of all the CEOs we have. So woman, excellent work she's doing. One of the downstream companies that we have, retail, is headed by a woman as well. She's also a partner in the business. So we're doing that. We're moving them also to board level. And also we have more women on our board now coming in, and it's a conscious effort because now we have to actually, because of how we recruit, we don't think about it in recruiting because we just recruit on merit. We have to think harder at the top level to ensure that the women sit there. And then the last aspect of it is example, just leading by example. We found out also that as a leading company, it's important that other companies see that you have women at top level, because when they see that, then they're able to do the same. And also, we lead by example. We empower the women that work with us, and most of them are, especially the ones who are at senior level, I have no complaints with them. They're actually very, very good, but we need to do more. So there's a lot more that needs to be done. But that, you asked me, not about the country. So I answered about me. Okay, so the youths, how can the youths help? So one of the things that we found out regarding youths and within Nigeria is that you had to begin to divide in the past, before. Everything that was done needed to go through the government. And now we found out that you can using technology, using innovation and all of that you can bypass a lot of these things. And when we began to work in how you can design corruption out of a system, it's technology. And so Nigeria is one of the leading, in Africa you have Kenya and you have Nigeria as one of the leading areas where technology and apps are being used for all sorts of things. So you find a lot of technology-driven solutions coming in. It's driven in entertainment, it's driven in apps, it's driven in music, it's driven also in agriculture. A lot of agriculture products are coming and a lot of them are youths. I said that we have to keep the youths engaged. It's very, very important that we keep them engaged. So what we do, I speak a lot to them, but what we tell them is the way that we started our business and the hurdles that we had to face, they don't need to face it anymore. So you can do crowdsourcing for funding. They used to think that the only way you can start a business is that you have to go to somebody who will give you money, or you have to go to the bank to get money to start the business. Not anymore. You don't need to go that way. You can do crowdfunding. We have platforms today where in mentoring, we put people in touch with ideas and we bring them together so that they can go out. We have university programs like Enactors. Enactors is a global university program that looks for technology and ideas that solve social problems. We teach them how to pitch, how to do their business, how to compete at the global level, and then we bring them to competitions at a global setting so that they meet other students of their like, and then they can work together. We have things like the Kairos Society, which again is a global, so I advise them at the American level, and I show them opportunities that exist on the continent so that they can pair them with ideas. Again, in today's world with technology, you don't have to leave your space for you to provide a solution. And so we're trying to stop migration using technology, that it's very possible for you to sit down and do work, right, where you can sit in Nigeria and you can do work for somebody in Hong Kong, different time, So you're sitting in a good time zone, and your time zone works both ways. So you can provide solutions for people in the US when those in Japan are sleeping and Australia are sleeping, and likewise. But you are actually sitting in a good time zone, just like Spain is, so we're in this time zone. So it's a good time zone, but you have to educate people so that they see the opportunities and they understand the opportunities. We're also teaching them that in impact, you can impact in little ways, but the little ways gather and they become big. So you don't have to wait to make $1 million for you to know that you can make an impact. No, you can make your impact in little ways, and those impacts, if you come together, it begins to grow. So those are some of the ways, but I'm seeing it. We're actually seeing that a lot of young people are making huge impacts. Now, the problem that we are having as a business, and this is a real problem, the problem we are having as a business now is that a lot of young people, because of the awareness that they don't need to come into offices and all of that, they don't want to work in offices anymore. So the way we used to employ and the types of people that we used to see coming into the workforce, we don't see anymore. I have a son who started working in PwC. He worked for a year and a half, and he decided that, you know what, this structure of this office and all of that doesn't work for me anymore. I prefer to go and do the work amongst my generation, right, that has to do with impact and social impact on technology on a day-to-day basis rather than going to the office. So it's becoming a problem for old structures, old institutions, the way institutions used to be, and we have to change completely. And so the way we recruit is changing, the type of people we recruit is changing, how we engage with them is changing completely. So that's the flip side of it. So we educate to be independent, but it affects us in a different way. Did I answer everybody's question?
We had another one.
Okay. How much? Yeah. So how much of my time am I doing this now? Paloma takes too much of my time, huh? A lot. But just kidding. So I think I spend about, probably about 30% of my time with this now. The rest of the time I have to deal with, actually it's more. So 30 of my time on an outside basis, dealing with people externally. Internally within the company, another 30% of that time doing what I do externally, internally within the company, and all of that. And then the other 40% of the time dealing with day-to-day businesses. So probably, I will say about 60% of that time is working, doing something related with this. Regarding resources that we have put together, a while ago we decided that about 5% of our turnover will go into projects like this. Now, a couple of years ago, let me see, so we're probably turning over about roughly world economic crash, oil prices went down. So maybe about $8 billion is turned over today. So about 5% of that goes into some form of social projects, one way or the other somewhere. So that's what we do. Okay.
Thank you, Tony. Any other last round of questions? We're here. Maybe everybody is already tired. You know everything already. Well, I think it was a great presentation. Some questions, interesting questions. Maybe you want to add some.
So I have a question.
You have a question for them. Okay, it's your turn then.
So just one question. So I started off the presentation with 2 tasks. The first task was that I had to keep you awake.
Yes. You got it.
Did I succeed?
Yes. You succeeded.
It was good.
Yeah,
I did that. What was the second one? That it had to be an interesting presentation. I hope it was. Yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. So, thank you very much, Tony. Thank you for your presentation. Muchas gracias a todos. Ha sido un día intenso y nos ha faltado una ponente. Que vamos a intentar que esté mañana a primera hora, porque bueno, ha tenido un problema mecánico según venía para acá, pero estará mañana con nosotros. No olvidéis firmar todos la hoja de asistencia. Si la habéis firmado todos, me la devolvéis. Y mañana nos vemos a la misma hora. ¿Vale? Venga, muchísimas gracias a todos. Buen descanso.
Okay.